Sometimes it's good for me to get away. If you guys don't know, we went to Chicago for 6 days last week. I was asked by one of my family members to go to Chicago and do his wedding. But while we were there, we had all sorts of fun. You know, if you are friends with us on Facebook, you know that Christina's addiction is real. She made me drive far away places to get her coffee. We were staying in the suburbs, and yet every day I had to drive at least 30, 40 minutes for no other reason than to go get her cups of coffee in the city. And so it wasn't, if you ever been to Chicago, it was literally a trial to go and get her coffee, because not only are we dealing with distance, but we're dealing with multiple toll lanes. I didn't know this about Chicago, but almost every freeway, it's $1.50, $1.90, and so her coffee addiction got really expensive. Okay, so if you guys want to bring us hospitality this week to be able to feed our children, that would be a good thing, because we're out of money because of coffee and toll lanes. But no. That's kind of what we did. I mean, we had a lot of fun as a family. Last Saturday night, I actually got to go watch the Dodgers lose, which was the most beautiful part of the trip. Think about it. An LA kid in Chicago while LA's there starting the playoffs, game 1. I was like, I got to go. But I was really nervous to talk to her and say, hey, would you mind if I leave you and the kids in a hotel room on a Saturday night in a foreign city so I can go with my brothers to this baseball game? But it was literally one of those bucket list kind of moments. We all have bucket lists, right? All of us have things that we like to be able to check off. And being at Wrigley Field was amazing. Standing on that corner with the big Wrigley sign, it was amazing. But to be able to watch the Dodgers lose in the fashion that they did, to watch Dodger fans, the few that were there around me, get their hopes up by tying the game, and then to watch, it wasn't a single, it wasn't a double, it wasn't a wild pitch or a stolen base, but a grand slam literally crush Dodger fans in the heart. It was the most beautiful thing for me. And then at the end of the game, to be a part of 50,000 people cheering, "Go Cubs, go." I mean, we don't have those sort of songs here. I mean, I guess we have an LA song, but I'm an Angel fan, so we don't have those songs. We have a monkey jumping up and down, but we have no song. And to be a part of that atmosphere, and it was just the most beautiful thing. The reason I bring that up to you guys is so I can brag, yes, that I got to go to the playoff game last Saturday night. But I also bring that up to you guys because it was good to get away. I had a great time. And another reason, I'm going to be honest with you guys, why it was good to get away, it was because I didn't have to prepare a message last week. I'm just going to be honest. Pastor Mansell got a little lazy last week. I didn't have to prepare a message. So that was kind of nice. Saturday night, no pressure of having to prepare a message or figure out, okay, we're going through Romans. Let's figure out some Greek words and things like that, or develop points or things like that. But the reason why it was such a wonderful time and why I like to be able to get away every once in a while is because it gives me extra time to be able to seek the Lord. It gives me extra time to be able to really pray for our church. It gives me extra time to be able to sit before the Lord and just have the Lord just do things in my heart and in my mind. It gives me extra time to listen to podcasts that I might not be able to listen to if I was having to prepare message after message. And while I was away, one of the things that the Lord was really pressing upon my heart for our church, and I think it was good to be able to get away and to be able to have the Lord speak into my heart, was the Lord was ministering to my heart. Before I left, I talked to quite a few of you who were going through just trials. You know, before I left, I had talked to quite a few of you who were going through just spiritual attack in your life. Before I left, I talked to a lot of you who the pressure, it was getting heavy. The intensity of life, and situations and trials, it was starting to pick up the pace, the attack, the pounding from the enemy. It was getting to be too much for some of you. And so I felt it was needful this morning to be able to remind you guys in the Word that the difficulties that we are going through, that some of the stress that we find ourselves in this morning, some of the anxiety that you maybe have woken up with this day, today, I felt it was necessary to take a time out for Romans and to be able to jump into this particular passage, administer to all of us some simple truths. First truth that I really feel like is important for us to think about and allow the Lord to minister to our heart in is just the simple truth that you are loved. I mean, it's so elementary. It's so like first grade, kindergarten level of Christianity. And yet I think sometimes the enemy can distort God's love for us. And so I think it's important for us to go through this text this morning and realize that, man, there's someone who loves us. Despite the pressure, despite the fears, despite the heaviness, despite the attack, there is someone who loves us. Secondly, I think it's important this morning for us, while all this is going on around us, to be reminded that there's someone who's praying for us. Think about that one for a minute. You are going through something. If you are going through an attack right now, if your life, there's pressure at this moment, if there's anxiety rising up within you, I want you to know that there is someone praying for you. And this isn't someone you passing by in the hall with someone, or you walking down the street, or you're on the phone or texting with someone, and you tell somebody your issues, and all of a sudden they say, oh yeah, I'll keep you in prayer. And then the two of you walk away from each other, and then that person forgot to pray for you. How many of you guys have been in that situation? Okay, let me ask you another question. How many of you have ever been the person that said you were going to pray for someone, you walked away and you forgot to pray for them? I think we've all been there, right? Oh man, that's really heavy. I'm going to pray for you. Peace. And then you walk away and it's just gone. But I think it's important to realize that even if that is what's around you, there is someone who is praying for you. And then I also think it's important, thirdly, for us to realize that there is a purpose and a hope in the midst of our struggles. Whatever you're going through, whatever the attack might be, whatever the heaviness or the pressure might be, there is a purpose for why you're going through it. It's not in vain. This isn't God in heaven looking at you thinking this is funny, let me just, like he's just messing with you or putting you in some situation so he finds some sort of comedy or something hilarious about it. There is definitely purpose and hope in the midst of our struggle. And our text this morning is Luke chapter 22, verses 31 through 34. And Luke chapter 22 is sort of a roller coaster of a chapter. I mean, there are so many highs, there are so many lows. I mean, it is all over the place. So let me just give you guys a little bit of background. If you're taking notes, verses 1 through 6, Satan, we're told, enters into the heart of Judas, and Judas agrees to betray Jesus. You guys remember there is a price tag upon Judas's loyalty. Why? Because Satan has entered into the heart of Judas. And so Judas makes this deal. In a sense, we all heard the phrase, he makes a deal with the devil, and he agrees to betray Jesus. So obviously we have a low moment in the roller coaster. We have the drop there right at the beginning. But then we get to verses 7 through 20, and we have a high moment. The Passover is being prepared. Jesus is on his way, minutes, hours from the cross. The Passover's prepared, a meal's shared, Last Supper, and Jesus institutes what you and I call today communion. He has that moment with his disciples, and when I think of that moment, as I was reading it this week, I was thinking to myself, what a sweet moment. What an amazing moment that is taking place here between Jesus and his disciples. The breaking of the bread. Jesus saying, hey, every time we're going to institute something here. Every time you do this in remembrance of me. The sweetness of that moment. The roller coaster's now on its way up. I mean, it's this highlight moment. But the sweet moment has a but. Verses 21 through 23. In verse 21, it says, after that high moment, it says, but. And now the roller coaster begins to go back down again as Jesus tells them that someone at the table is going to betray him. And then we're told that in the midst of that setting, in the midst of that moment, they're all trying to figure out, well, who it is. Is it me? Is it him? Is it you? You're kind of bad. I've been speculating about you. Been thinking it might be you. And they're all trying to figure out who it is, what that moment is. So now the roller coaster has gone down here back in chapter 22. And then, all of a sudden, we have verses 24 through 27. So you thought you're on one drop, but now we got an extra drop down the roller coaster. I mean, it was a double dip. And so verses 24 and 27, an argument breaks out between the disciples about who is the greatest. It was kind of like a Muhammad Ali kind of conversation. You know, who's the greatest? Well, I'm the greatest. I'm the greatest. And so Jesus has to give them a mild rebuke to tell them, hey, it doesn't matter. Stop concerning yourself with who the greatest is. Well, what's interesting about this moment, time out for a minute, think about it with me. They were amongst, or they were before the greatest. Think about that one with me for a minute. They were arguing about who's the greatest, and yet the greatest is standing right there with them. I mean, what a moment for them to completely miss it. Hey, I'm the greatest. You're the greatest. The greatest is right before us. He's about to lay down his life for us. But anyways, you guys can continue to argue. And Jesus just rebukes them and tells them, hey, that's not what it's about. Then we get to verse 28 through 30. All of a sudden, we're at the lowest point of our roller coaster right here in 22. And all of a sudden, it shoots back up again in 28 through 30, where Jesus tells them that they are going to have a prominent role in his coming kingdom. And so all of a sudden, now we're back to being excited again. I mean, this thing is just this giant roller coaster. Yay, we get to be a part of his coming kingdom. We are on top of the roller coaster again. And now we get to verse 31, our text this morning. And guess what's going to happen? We are going to go right back down. Notice the words, verse 31. And the Lord said, right after telling them they're going to be a part of his kingdom, here's the drop. Simon, Simon, Peter, Peter, indeed, Satan has asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat. Now, I want to stop right here for a minute, and I want us to kind of think about this situation, this chapter, and I want you guys to draw the parallel between this chapter and the roller coasters of this chapter to our life. Doesn't this chapter, isn't it almost like looking into the mirror of our own life? It's like one moment's a highlight. The next moment's a trial. The next moment's a spiritual high. The next moment, okay, here it comes. One moment, oh man, I can do this. I want to be at church forever and worship the Lord. The next minute, we got some drama at work. One moment, it's over here. You're just like, man, I just want to serve the Lord all my days. All of a sudden, something's going on at home and everything's falling apart. I mean, it's just this roller coaster of life here in our life and here in chapter 22. But I think verse 31 gives us insight into the roller coaster and why there is this high and low when it comes to life. Jesus said, hey, Peter, I got to tell you something. And I'm sure it was a difficult conversation for Jesus to have. I'm pretty sure it's not something that just came and it's like, oh, this is going to be a fun one. Let me break it to him. But it's like, Peter, come here for a minute. I know everything's been arguing and chaotic, and we got some jokes here, some excitement here, but I need your attention for a minute, Peter. I need to share something with you that's going on behind the scenes that I think you need to have a wake-up call and realize. And he says, Satan's asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat. If you're taking notes this morning, there's a few words I want to take a look at just within the text here. He says, hey, Satan has asked for you. If you're taking notes, would you write this down? The word ask there in the Greek, or in another Bible translation, it's literally the word demanded. Ask. Demanded. You see, we look at ask and we think of Satan coming and saying, hey, God, I have a request, that there's something I have to ask you in some sort of timid way. Those of us that ever had to propose to someone and had to go ask that guy for his daughter's hand in marriage, it's a very crazy experience. And how many of you guys have ever had to have that moment? A few of us here, we've been there, right? Where you're like, excuse me, and you're very timid. It's frightening. You're scared. You're like, yeah, if it's okay, sir. Yeah, I'd like to spend the rest of my life with your daughter, please, you know. And then you back up because you don't want to get socked or shot or anything else. It says, please. That's not this type of asking. As a dad, oh my goodness, I got 3 gorgeous hotties, 3 gorgeous girls. I look forward to the day that a boy comes to ask me if he could date my daughter. And then eventually ask me if he could marry her. I'm going to have so much fun with that moment. It's going to be, and you guys know me, I'm the only saved one in my family. So I might bring my gangster brothers over for the conversation. You know, he's going to come to me. He's like, can I talk to you? I'm like, no, talk to me in an hour. Call my brothers on the phone. Hey, get over here. I'm throwing a barbecue. And I'll bring all of them, wife beaters and tattoos. And we're going to have that conversation with my brothers there. I'm just going to have fun with that moment. But it's one of those where you're sitting there and it's just, excuse me, I have to talk to you. But no, Satan doesn't ask politely. He demands. Demands. Hey, God, you know those 12, you know the boys, you know those followers, those ones. I want them. I need them. I'd like your permission to go after them. I would like your permission to pound them. I would like your permission to scatter them. I would like your permission to allow the pressure and the heaviness of life to come upon their faith. This is what Satan's doing at this moment. And Jesus says, hey, Peter, I just want to let you know that he has demanded you. Second Greek word here in verse 31, if you're taking notes, the word you. So ask in the Greek, it wasn't what we thought. It's demanded. But the word you here in the Greek in verse 31 isn't what we think also. When we think of you, we think of you individually. But in actuality, the word here in the Greek for you, and then again there at the end of verse 31 twice, the word you is actually a plural word in the Greek. And so Jesus, think about this with me for a minute. Jesus gets a little bit ghetto, okay? If you think about this for a minute. He doesn't say, Satan's asked for you, Queena. But he's looking, in a sense, and like if I'm talking to Queena, it's like, hey, Satan's asked for all y'all. You know, that's what Jesus is saying. That's what it is in the Greek. He's asking for all of y'all up in here, you know. He wants everybody here. But I'm talking to Queena, but he wants everybody. Hey, he wants you, meaning everyone. He says, Satan has asked, demanded for all 12 of you. Peter, I'm talking to you, but I want to let you know that it's not just you he's after, but the attack is upon the entirety of the group. He's asked for you, that he may sift you, all of you, as wheat. I know at first glance within this text here in verse 31, it's kind of a scary thought. It's kind of a scary thought that there might be this conversation taking place between God Almighty who loves me and the enemy. And I want you guys to think about this with me for a minute. The Bible talks a lot about this one who's asked for us. The Bible talks a lot about him. We kind of downplay it, but Satan has a lot of power in this world. Jesus calls him the prince or the ruler of this world in John chapter 16, verse 11. Paul calls Satan the god of this age, 2 Corinthians 4:4. And then Paul also refers to him in Ephesians 2:2 as the ruler of the authority of the air. And he also tells us in 2 Corinthians 4:4 that he blinds the mind of the unbeliever. So the person that refuses to follow and surrender to God, he blinds their mind. And so you look out in the world and you're wondering to yourself, why is everything so crazy? Why is it so hard to get through to people? All you want to do is share the gospel with them. All you want to do is tell them that Jesus loves them. And yet there's a wall, there's a hardness, there's a blindness, there's a refusal. And it's because Satan has blinded the mind of the unbeliever. And so there is power. Satan has a lot of power, in a sense, in this world. But the good news is, how does he get that power? He gets it, in a sense, by permission. And so there's nothing that we go through where permission hasn't been asked. You guys know the story in Job chapter 1? There's a conversation taking place between God and Satan. And Satan says, hey, that guy Job, that one that's like right on, he fears you. He loves you. He's loyal to you. But I'll tell you what, if you were to ever allow anything to come into his life, he would turn his back on you. He would stop following you. And if that conversation happened about Job, would you give me eyes for a minute, church? I'm pretty sure that conversation's happened about you. Especially if you love the Lord, you're on fire for him, you're right on with him, you're following him. I'm pretty sure that conversation's taken place as well. That one. Can I have permission? I'm asking, I'm demanding to be able to go into their life a bit with trial, with heaviness. But I think it's important for us to realize this morning that Satan must go to God for permission before he can trouble the life of one of God's children. But it brings up another question, though. And I think this is the bigger question here this morning. Why would God allow Satan to have that type of power? He's the God of this world, the prince of this age, the God of this age. He blinds the mind of the unbelievers. But why, if God is all powerful and Satan is limited by permission and his power, why does God go through this whole thing of, and think about this one for a minute, of granting his arch enemy, his arch nemesis, his demand? So he comes and says, this is what I demand. This is what I ask. Why are there moments where God actually gives permission for his arch enemy to go after one of his kids? Why didn't it happen a long time ago? I mean, we've read the book of Revelation, right? Think about it with me for a minute. We know the end of the story. But why does God tolerate Satan at all? Why has he tolerated him for so long? We're told there in Revelation chapter 20 that at the end of the story is that eventually Christ returns. He's going to bind Satan, you guys know, for 1,000 years. And then there's going to be one last deceiving. And then all of a sudden after that, there's going to be that one last final victory of God. And he's going to be thrown into the lake of fire. And that is where he's going to spend eternity or forever. But why play this out? Why go through this whole scenario of allowing and giving permission in certain moments for Satan to touch the life of one of his children? Well, I think the answer, and this is just kind of my opinion through reading through the scriptures, it's a faith battle. And I want you guys to think about this one with me for a minute. In Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9, God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways, says the Lord. For as high as the heavens are from the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. So this is what God's saying. He says, you have a good question. This whole thought pattern that's developing in your mind, these questions that you're asking, they're good questions. But my ways are higher than your ways. And my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. I don't know about you, but sometimes I play God, in my mind at least. In here, I have full authority. It's really cool. I have full authority in here at least, not out here, but in here, to play out these scenarios in my mind. Well, if I was God, this is what I would do. Well, if I were God, I would somehow come out of nowhere. We're 2 weeks away from voting. I would somehow out of nowhere raise up a third candidate for the president. I mean, this is what I would do if I was God, right? I was like, all of a sudden, some other person pops. I was like, hey, and we're like, oh, finally we got one we can vote for. You know what I mean? This is what I would do if I was God. I got all these ideas in my mind. If I were God, this is how it would play out. And yet God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. It's a little bit different here. I have a plan. And it's a faith battle. It is literally a faith battle. How do I know this? Because I believe on this particular day, at this particular conversation between Jesus and Peter, where he says Satan wants to sift you as wheat, he's asked for you, he's demanded you. I believe Peter learned a good lesson that night. You see, 30 years later, Peter would talk about and write a letter that had to do with faith. Listen to what he says. Satan's plan is in demanding you. He says in 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 8 and 9, he says, you have an adversary, the devil, who prowls around, who roams around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And then this was Peter's words. He says, resist him firm in your faith. So this is what Peter says 30 years later. He says, I learned a lesson that night with Jesus, and it was that Satan wants to sift me as wheat. But furthermore, the purpose of the sifting, the purpose of the pressure, the purpose of the destroying is to not destroy me, my flesh, my person, but it's to destroy my faith. So I need to stand firm against them, holding on to keeping my faith. How do I know that Jesus is doing and God's doing the same thing? Because in 1 Peter chapter 1, 30 years later, verse 7, Peter says these words. He says, these trials will show that your faith is genuine. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. So when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring to you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. So this is what Peter says. He says, I learned something that night. I learned that Jesus has a plan for the pressure. He says, I learned that there's a reason why God gives permission for trials in my life. It's to develop your faith. It's to grow you and mature you as a man and a woman after God's own heart. So if I were God, I'd do it completely different. But because his way is higher than my ways, his thoughts higher than my thoughts, he says, I have a plan, and this is my thought, this is my plan. It is to develop your faith. It is to test, it is to make sure that it's genuine. And he says, and Satan has a plan too for demanding, it's to destroy your faith. And so this heart-to-heart conversation that Jesus is having with Peter here in Luke 22:31, he says he's asked to sift you as wheat. He's asked to sift you as wheat. The whole sifting process, I'm not a farmer. I'm the most unmanliest man that you will ever meet. My nickname for myself is Feminine Fellow. You know, I mean, that's my nickname. And so this whole farming process and beating wheat and grains, I mean, that's just not my thing. There's nothing fun about it, you know. I'm sure a few of you men want to rip off your shirt, go to the middle of a farm and beat things and have fun. But that's just not me. So I'm going to do the best I can real quick to try to talk about this. But he wants to sift you. He wants to sift you, Peter. Let's take a time out right there for a minute. Give me your eyes for a minute, church. He wants to sift you, Christian. He wants to sift you, man of God. He wants to sift you, woman of God. He wants to sift you. The sifting process involved beating and pounding, followed by shaking. Do we have the image? There's an image here. You guys can't see it too well, but what they would do, this is kind of how they would do the sifting process in the old days. They would literally have to take the wheat and they would have to pound it. And they would have to beat it. And they would have to just allow it to just be crushed. Nowadays, obviously, we have some machinery. I think there's a second photo. But you literally now take it and it's grinded. But it's the same image here. We have this wheat. We need to separate the wheat from the chaff. And so we either go through the beating process, we go through the destruction process, we go through this whole process, and then you finally get it to where you want it. And what they would do is they would take the beaten wheat, they would take what is called a sieve, or what you and I would call a colander. You know, when you're doing your pasta with the little holes in it, you take it, you put it into there, and hopefully the chaff falls through. But what's interesting is, why does he say, hey, Satan wants to sift you as wheat? Well, he wants to beat you. He wants to pound you. And then throw you in the bowl and shake you. And see if you'll fall through the cracks. See if he can somehow separate you from your faith. He says, hey, Peter, and all of you, Satan wants to separate you from following me, Jesus would say. And he's asked for permission to do this in your life. Let's get real for a minute. A lot of us in here this morning, we've gone through seasons in our Christianity where we stopped following. You know, we've been through moments where we've been beaten, pounded, shaken, and we walked away. Maybe you're in that very moment right now. Or maybe you just recently came back to the Lord and you're holding on with all you can. And he says, this is what life is going to look like if you follow me. It's going to involve pounding, beating, shaking. But I want to strengthen you so that when the beating, the pounding, the shaking does happen, you remain firm in your faith. Peter's going to learn a lesson this night, because right after this in the text, he says, and by the way, Peter, you're going to deny me. And by the way, Peter, for just a split moment, you're going to want nothing to do with me, not claim me. And you think your faith is strong, but I'm going to allow Satan's demand in your life just to show you how weak your faith is and how desperately I need you to cling to me. Because Peter's thinking his faith is strong. Peter's thinking, man, I would never deny you. And Jesus says, before the night's over, the rooster's going to crow 3 times. You're going to deny me. Little girl's going to come up. You want to hit it? Oh, no, I don't know. And he's like, man, in the face of a little tiny girl, you're going to be weak, Peter. And he's like, but there's an end result. Strength. Your faith is strengthened. You know, this morning, if you're here and maybe you're going through something, or maybe you're at a place right now where there's a lot of pressure, heaviness, beating, pounding, shaking. I believe God brought you to church this morning for verse 32. I mean, it's the most amazing reminder here in verse 32. Would you guys look at it with me? He says, I've brought you low in this roller coaster ride of chapter 22. Let me take you back up. Now that I told you all of this, Peter, I also want you to know that I've prayed for you. I have prayed for you that your faith, because this is a faith battle, I have prayed that your faith should not fail. Let that sink in for a minute. Give me your eyes for a minute, church. Let that one sink in. Let the encouragement of verse 32 just resonate in your heart for a moment. Jesus says, I have prayed for you. I've been praying for you. And so whatever you're going through right now, whatever you've been battling, whatever the struggle's been, whatever the attack's been, Jesus is like, I've been right here praying for you. The demand's been granted, yet I am praying for you. I am praying for your faith. In Hebrews chapter 7, verse 24 and 25, it says, because Jesus lives forever, his priesthood lasts forever. Therefore, he is able once and forever to save those who come to God through him. He lives forever, listen to this, to intercede with God on their behalf. And so those who come to God through faith in Jesus Christ, it says that Jesus lives forever to intercede on your behalf. In Romans chapter 4, verse 34, in the J.B. Phillips translation, because I think it reads so well, it says, he who would dare to accuse us, whom God has chosen, the judge himself has declared us free from sin. Who is in a position to condemn? Only Christ, and Christ died for us, and Christ rose for us. Christ reigns in power for us. And listen to this, and Christ prays for us. Another translation says that he is at the right hand of God, interceding, praying for us. Stop right there for a second. Let that one sink in. Jesus is praying for us right now. This wasn't a one-time thing on that particular night with Peter, but this is an everyday thing, forevermore thing with all of us. That he's praying for us. Whatever you're going through, he's praying for you. He is interceding on your behalf at the right hand of the Father. He's praying for you. And it might be one of those things, nobody else knows what you're going through. He knows what you're going through, and he's praying for you. Because you might be like, no one knows what I'm going through, so I'm too ashamed to share it. And so no one's praying for me. Someone is praying for you because they know it. Us out here might not know it, but he knows it, and he's praying for you. He's interceding for you. The heaviness that you walked in with this morning, he says, I'm praying for you. The anxiety that keeps you up at night, he says, I'm praying for you. Your biggest fear as a spouse, he says, I'm praying for that. He says, the thing that you're stressing out about with your kids, he says, I'm praying for that. The pressure of financial whatever that you're going through in your personal life, in your business, whatever it is, he says, I'm praying for that. This crazy mind that some of us have that goes in too many different directions, he says, I'm praying for that. This battle with the flesh that you are too ashamed to confess it to anyone and ask for prayer or keep you accountable, he says, I'm praying for that. He says, this temptation that you're facing, this pressure you're dealing with, he says, all of it. Doesn't matter what it is. The Bible tells us in Hebrews that everything is open and naked before God. And so we can hide it from each other. We can't hide it from him. It is exposed, and he's praying for you. I mean, I read this week, and I was like, Lord, thank you. Because there's pressure that I go through that nobody else knows about. There's heaviness that I allow in my life, and I give into it, and I deal with it. There's things in my mind, and God's like, I'm praying for you. And we're here this morning. And I just felt this week, the Lord's like, there is some heavy stuff in your church. There's some heavy stuff in people's lives. There's battles in the mind that no one knows about. There's struggles on the heart that are just overwhelming. I want you guys to pray for each other. And I want you to remind that I'm praying too.